Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm here today to continue reading Journey to the River Sea by Eva Ibbotson, illustrated by Kevin Hawkes, and published by Puffin Books. We're getting very close to the end, so I'm going to pick up where we left off with chapter 17. One of the things Clovis had been most afraid of was being forced to ride. He had seen the horses in the stable, and they looked large and twitchy. If Sir Aubrey put him in the saddle, Clovis meant to confess straight away and take the money that Finn had given him to run away to his foster mother. But the week after he arrived at Westwood, Sir Aubrey asked Clovis to come to the library because he had some bad news for him. "Now I want you to be brave about this, my boy. I want you to take this like a man and a taverner." Clovis's heart began to thump. Could someone have died? Maya, perhaps, or his foster mother? And if so, how did Sir Aubrey know? Or was it that he just found out? "I won't hide from you the fact that the Basher, your Aunt Joan, disagrees with me. She was all ready to teach you. She picked out a fine, meddlesome filly to start you out on, nothing sluggish or second-rate, a real thoroughbred. You'd be going over jumps in a couple weeks, but I'm afraid I cannot allow it." "Can't allow what, sir?" said Clovis. "I can't allow you to ride, can't allow you to go on a horse. You can imagine what it cost me to come to this decision. The Taverner children have always been up on the saddle from when they were 2 years old. But after Dudley's terrible accident..." Tears came to Sir Aubrey's eyes. He turned away. "If there was anyone else to inherit Westwood, I would let you take your chance, but with Bernard and Dudley both gone..." He pressed Clovis's shoulder. "You're taking this very well, my boy. Very well indeed. You're taking it like a man. I confess I expected arguments, even tantrums." "Well, it is a disappointment," said Clovis, wondering whether to break down and cry, a thing all actors learn to do at the drop of a hat. But in the end, he just gave a brave gulp instead. "I had, of course, been looking forward..." He looked out the window where the Basher, mounted on a bruising chestnut, was galloping across the field. "But I do understand. One must always think of Westwood." Sir Aubrey nodded. "You're a good lad. Of course no one will ever take Dudley's place, but..." He took out his handkerchief and blew it into it fiercely. "And there's another thing about your schooling. Bernard was very weedy about his schooling, but then Bernard was weedy about everything. All the same, I think you're a bit old to be sent away now. Boys usually leave home about 7 or 8, you know, and you'd feel out of it. So I'm going to engage a tutor for you. He'll come next month when you're settled in." "Thank you, sir," said Clovis. And then, "I'm afraid I'm not very clever." Sir Aubrey looked shocked. "Oh, good heavens, boy, I should hope not. The Taverners have never been bookish, except for your poor father, and look what happened to him." Clovis went downstairs and out into the garden, where the little banshees were waiting for him to play ball with them. If he didn't have to ride, then maybe he could hold out another week or two before he confessed. The idea of confessing was nasty, not just because everybody would be so angry with him, but because Sir Aubrey would be disappointed. He'd obviously mellowed a lot since Bernard was a boy. Old gentlemen did that, Clovis knew, at the end of their lives. It was while they were having lunch that Clovis decided that he would find a way of visiting his foster mother in the next few days. She would know what to do for the best, and he wanted to make sure that she was still there in her cottage on the village green before he gave himself up. The butler took away Clovis's pudding plate and filled it up with a second helping of apple crumble. The way the young master enjoyed his food gave great pleasure below stairs. It was a pity that the cook was engaged to be married and would soon be leaving. Mrs. Bates, Clovis's foster mother, lived at the end cottage of a row of small farm cottages on Stanton Green. Her husband had died even before she took in Clovis, but she was thrifty and hard-working, and though she had to go out to work in some of the big houses in the neighborhood, she kept her house and garden spotless. Clovis had come by bus. Sir Aubrey had given him a 10-shilling note for pocket money, so there was no need for him to use the money that Finn had given him. As he crossed the green, it seemed to Clovis that nothing had changed. The well was still there in the center of the common and the old oak tree, and some boys were kicking a football in the grass. He had been gone 4 years. They were too young to remember him. But when he knocked on the door of the cottage and opened it, Mrs. Bates went red and then white and hugged him while the tears ran from her eyes. "Jimmy," she kept saying. Well, you're back. Jimmy, and how you've grown. And my, don't you look well. So smart. So this Goodleys did right by you after all." "Well, not exactly. The company folded up, and so I came back." "Aye, and don't you speak nicely. Oh, I can't believe it. I was thinking how I would never see you again. Sit down, boy. There's some scones in the oven. They'll be done in a jiffy, and there's some buttermilk fresh from the cow." While she spoke, he looked around the room. He'd been Jimmy Bates, and then Clovis King, and now was Finn Taverner. But here nothing had changed. The cross-stitch sampler was still above the mantelpiece, the brass kettle was still on the hob, there was a pink geranium on the windowsill, but everything looked smaller and poorer somehow. Had things been hard for his foster mother? Her apron was neatly darned, but there seemed to be more darns than cloth. Had the rug always been so threadbare? "Have you been all right, Mother?" he asked her. "Oh, aye, times aren't easy, but I do some cooking for the people in the village, and I manage with the garden and all. Oh yes, I manage fine." She went to the oven, and she took out the scones. "Well now," she said, putting out the butter and the homemade strawberry jam, "you start talking, boy. You start right from when those goodlies took you away. I want to know everything." So Clovis began. He told her about the years of traveling, the discomfort, the low pay, but also some of the good times in the beginning when the goodlies had made a pet of him, and he'd enjoyed acting. "I sent you some postcards, but they never remembered to let me have stamps." "I just got the one," said Mr. Bates. "Oh, I did miss you, Jimmy boy." "And I missed you," said Clovis, biting into his scone. The scones at Westwood were very good, but these were better. And then he told her about his last voyage to the Amazon, about meeting Maya and Miss Minton, and about the disaster of the Lord Fauntleroy matinee. To Mrs. Bates, it was like a fairy story. Go on," she kept saying. So Clovis went on to what happened with Finn at the lagoon, and the plan they had worked out to set Finn free and get Clovis back to England. But now poor Mrs. Bates seemed to be very muddled and very upset. "You mean you're pretending to be someone else?" "Well, that's what actors do," said Clovis. "Yes, but everyone knows it's only a pretense." She shook her head. "You mean at Westwood they think that you're the heir? And they're still thinking that?" "Yes, but I know I'll have to confess." "Of course you will, Jimmy. You couldn't live a lie. That grand place, I've heard it's splendid. You must tell them straight away. And of course you can come here. Times is hard, but we'll manage." "Thank you," said Clovis. He looked round the cottage again. Funny how small it was. He had wanted to be back here when he was with the Goodleys, but now... But he knew his foster mother was right. He would confess. He'd do it the very next day. But finding a time to do it was not easy. The next day Sir Aubrey was shut up with his bailiff, and the day after that he was driven into York for a checkup with his doctor. But on the third day after Clovis had seen his foster mother, Sir Aubrey suggested a little walk round the park. He took his stick and a pair of binoculars and put on his deerstalker hat, and they set off. "It's time you got to know the estate," he told Clovis. But before they crossed the courtyard, Sir Aubrey stopped by the statue with the severed head. He touched the neck stump with his stick and then ran it over the battered forehead and nose of the head lying on the ground. "Something I wanted to ask you, my boy," he said, "about this statue. Could you leave the head the way it is after I go? Because of Dudley. Something to remember him by." He sniffled and blew his nose. "After you go, sir. After I pop my clogs, turn my toes up. Die, you know. What, everything in this place is yours?" Clovis took a deep breath. Now was the time. He couldn't go on with his lie. "Actually, sir, I've something to tell you." He flushed but went on resolutely. "You see..." A thunderous braying voice interrupted him. The basher, mounted on an enormous black horse, came galloping across the home paddock toward them. Behind her, looking cold and worried, came the 3 banshees on their ponies. "Came to ask the boy to tea," brayed the basher. "The girls want him to play charades." So that was the end of the first confession. The next time he was alone with Sir Aubrey was after dinner, when they were served coffee in the drawing-room. The fire was drawing nicely. Sir Aubrey looked sleepy and amiable. Perhaps he wouldn't be too angry. "Sir Aubrey, I've got something to tell you." "Grandfather. I told you to call me grandfather." "You see, there's been a mistake, a muddle. The Crows, I mean Mr. Trapwood and Mr. Lowe. They thought I was someone else, and..." He began to quickly tell his story, looking down at the fireside rug. When he finished, he lifted his head, waiting for an explosion. Sir Aubrey lay stretched out on the chair. His arm hung limply by his side, and from his chest there came a deep and rumbling snore. He hadn't heard a word that Clovis had said. Clovis almost gave up after that. Only the thought of what his foster mother would say if he did not tell the truth kept him going. And at the beginning of his 3rd week at Westwood, he managed it. He was with Sir Aubrey and the picture gallery. The old man often took him there, and in particular he liked to stand Clovis next to the portrait of Admiral Sir Alwyn Taffner and his cocked hat and point out to Clovis how alike they were. "Look at the nose, boy, the way it turns up, just like yours." Or, "See the cleft in the chin, exactly the same." This time Clovis felt that he couldn't stand this, and before Sir Aubrey could take him to see a picture of what was supposed to be another of his great-great-granduncles, he took a deep breath and began. Sir Aubrey, I have to tell you. Grandfather, interrupted the old man. I have told you to call me grandfather. Clovis was getting desperate. Yes, but you see, you're not really my grandfather. There's a mistake. I'm sorry. I really... And this time, very quickly, he managed to tell his story. Clovis had often imagined what would happen after he opened up and told the truth. He imagined Sir Aubrey raging angrily or icily cold or even hurt, but never in his worst nightmares had he imagined anything as terrible as what happened next. Chapter 18. The twins still hadn't decided how to spend the money, and they still wouldn't take it to the bank. They had sewn 2 calico pouches to keep it in, which they wore around their necks even when doing their lessons. The pouches came down quite low over their stomachs, and every so often they patted them to make sure the money was still in there. Like kangaroos with indigestion, said Maya. But what upset Maya was the way that Miss Mitten was behaving. She had taken to going off on her own, and when Maya asked her where she was going, she gave answers that weren't answered at all. And had she been packing her trunk? The twins, of course, missed no chance to taunt Maya. Your precious Minty's got a secret, and we know what it is, jeered Beatrice. But we aren't going to tell you, said Gwendolen. Only you needn't think she's going to stay with you. Even so, it wasn't until Minty lost her temper with the twins that Maya realized that something was seriously wrong. They were doing an English exercise in Dr. Bowman's book. Beatrice, can you give me an example of alliteration? Asked Miss Minton. No, I can't, said Beatrice. What about you, Gwendolen? Gwendolen shook her head. I can't either. Miss Mitten's course was troubling her, but she kept her patience. Read what Dr. Bowman says again, Beatrice, at the top of the page. Alliteration is the use of words beginning with the same letter or containing the same letter. She stopped and patted her pouch. I don't know what that means. Miss Minton, who had explained it twice, explained again. Suppose you say, in a summer season when soft was the sun. It was at that moment that Mrs. Carter entered the dining room. Well, Miss Minton, how are the girls getting on? It's nearly time to send a report to Dr. Bowman. I hope you have it ready. Miss Minton looked at Beatrice, who was yawning, and at Gwendolen, who was scratching her ear. No, Mrs. Carter, she said, I do not have it ready. What's more, I'm not prepared to send a report unless the twins start to work properly. Ever since the reward came, they have been impossible to teach. I think you had better write the report yourself. And while Mrs. Carter gobbled with anger, Miss Minton got up from her chair. There will be no more lessons today, girls, she said, and swept out of the room as though she was a person with rights and not a governess. Maya had been in the dining room fetching more paper and had heard everything. She could not help being pleased, but she was scared, too. What if Mrs. Carter sent Minty away? The next day was Miss Mitten's afternoon off. Mrs. Carter tried to stop her from going, but Miss Minton said that she had business to attend to in Manus. You'd better be careful, Miss Minton. I have dismissed governesses for less impertinence than you have shown in the last few days. I did not mean to be impertinent, said Miss Minton, but at lunchtime she was seen getting on the rubber boat, bound for town. Is everything all right, Minty? Maya had asked before she had left. Everything's fine, said Miss Minton. Or rather it will be. Keep out of the way of the twins until they get back. But she explained nothing. Supper was never a cheerful meal in the house of rest, but that day it was like eating in a graveyard. Then halfway through the meal, Tappy came in with a letter brought by special messenger who had vanished back into the dark. Gonzales, said Mr. Carter in a low voice, and took it to his study. The letter was as bad as Carter had feared. Settlement day was tomorrow. He would meet Carter in his office by the docks. If Carter couldn't pay, Gonzales was going to send in the bailiffs. Bailiffs, cried Mrs. Carter, when her husband at last told her the truth of what was happening. Those dreadful people who take everything away, but they can't. Unfortunately, they can, said Mr. Carter. Don't you remember in Littleford? Mrs. Carter began to sob. Oh, not again. Not again. The disgrace. She gave a sudden shriek. Lady Parsons' portrait. They mustn't have that. I'll hide it first thing in the morning, she said wildly. Mr. Carter gave her a look. That's not worth much, but my collection. The twins, hearing raised voices, came down the corridor. What's the matter? What's happened? They want to know. Nothing, girls, nothing. It's bedtime. Mrs. Carter looked at the pouches round their necks. Tomorrow she would force the girls to take the money to the bank. And once the reward was safely deposited, The bank manager would help her work on the twins. It was ridiculous that they should keep all when the family was in such trouble. And don't sleep in those things, she went on. They could strangle you. Maya had gone to her room. She went to light her oil lamp and found that it was gone, and only a single candle and an old brass candlestick stood by her bed. She went down to the twins' room, and as she expected, she found that they had borrowed her lamp. "It's just for tonight," said Beatrice. "We need one each for what we've got to do. And anyway, everything in this house belongs to us, really." Maya was already in bed, trying to read by the light of a single candle, when there was a knock on the door and Tappy came in. She was dressed in her best clothes, but she looked worried. "We go to a wedding, a big wedding with dancing and eating. We must go because it's Firo's brother, and he'd be angry if we're not there." "That sounds fun, Tappy. I hope you enjoy it." "Yes, we all go. My sister, Conchita, Manuela, old Lila too. She'd not want to go, but she must." Tappy sighed. There had been a furious row earlier when Lila had said that she could not go. None of them could go because they had promised to look after Maya, and Firo had said that if they did not go, his brother would start a feud which could last for years. In the end, Lila had given in, and now they were all setting off in the canoe for the long journey upriver to the village, so as to be in time for the celebrations, which began at dawn. "But you be careful, yes, and Miss Minton should be back soon. Here is for you." Tabby took a bunch of bananas and a mango from the basket and laid them on Maya's bed. It was strange with the native people gone. No sound came from the huts. They had even taken the little dog. Maya looked at the clock. The last boat should be in soon. She would stay awake and say goodnight to Miss Minton. But she must have dozed off. When she looked again, it was nearly 10 o'clock. She hadn't heard anyone come in, but Minty could move very quietly when she chose. Maya got out of bed. The house was silent and dark. She took her candle and knocked on Miss Minton's door. The room was empty. Miss Minton's bed had not been slept in, but there was something else, something that frightened Maya badly. Miss Minton's trunk was gone. Back in her room, Maya told herself to not be silly, but the fear would not go away. Miss Minton's trunk was it was part of her. Hardly a day passed when she did not pick a book out and read Maya a passage or show her a picture. If the trunk was gone, surely it meant that the twins were right and Minty had left her. The more she thought about it, the more likely it seemed that Miss Minton being angry with the twins and standing up to Miss Carter and going off when she was told not to. Miss Minton no longer cared what the Carters thought of her because she was going away. Not since the news of her parents' death had Maya felt so wretched and alone. She tried to tell herself that Minty would not leave her, but lying there in the darkness, she failed. After all, Finn had left her. People did go away. Her parents had done it too. They'd gone to Egypt and left her at school. And now Minty. After another hour of tossing and turning, Maya went to the washstand and took 2 aspirins. Then she took a third for good measure, and at last she slept. And she slept deeply. An hour later, Beatrice woke and felt under her pillow for the pouch with the money in it, then remembered that she had hidden it under her clock temporarily. When she had borrowed Maya's lamp, it was with the plan of finding an even safer place for the money somewhere in the house while everyone was asleep. But now she had a brilliant idea. She put a match to the lamp, which flared up, leaving a stench of paraffin. "Wake up, Gwendolyn," she said, shaking her sister by the shoulder. "Listen, I've thought of a way of getting rid of Maya." Gwendolyn, half asleep, said, "What?" "We'll hide our money in Maya's cupboard in the dining room, the one where she keeps her books. We'll hide it in the one she's always reading, the one with the picture of the sloth. Then in the morning we'll scream and say our money's been stolen and make everyone search. And it will be found in Maya's things. Mommy will have to send her away then." Gwendolyn wasn't sure. Suppose Maya gets up before she finds us. She might steal it. She won't wake up before us. I'll set the alarm. You'll see, it'll work. Why don't you just hide your money in Maya's book? Don't be so feeble. It's got to be both of us. Come on. So Gwendolyn lit her lamp and the girls blundered about trying to remember where Gwendolyn had put it. "I put it in my underclothes drawer," said Gwendolyn. "I know I did, but it isn't there." "No, you didn't. You put it in your shoe bag." "No, I did not." But now, in her room down the corridor, Mrs. Carter woke up. She could hear the girls. What on earth were they up to? She put on her slippers and made her way to her daughter's room. On the way, she saw 2 large brown beetles, which narrowly missed her foot. "Cockroaches!" shrieked Mrs. Carter, and ran to her larder to take a can of cockroach killer. She sluiced it over the tiles where she had seen the beetles and hurried on to the twins' room, the can dribbling in her hand. "What on earth is it? What's the matter?" Now it was Beatrice who couldn't find her money. "I put it under the clock and it's gone. Gwendolyn's stolen it." "No, I haven't, you lying little grub. You put it in your sewing basket." "Mind the lamp," shouted Mrs. Carter as the girls began to fight. She grabbed for the lamp by Beatrice's bed, and as she did, the top came off the can of cockroach killer, and a sticky stream of black liquid poured over the burning wick. There was a loud whooshing noise, and a tongue of flame shot up. Mrs. Carter tried to put out the lamp and knocked it over. It was already too hot to touch. A curl of flame licked on the sheets on Beatrice's bed. The stream of cockroach killer was like a channel of fire which moved to the second bed. Beatrice screamed as her nightdress caught at the hem, and Mrs. Carter tried to beat out the flames with a pillow. "Out, girls, out! Not the window, the door! Hurry, hurry!" But they could hardly see now for the smoke. The second lamp and the light of the fire had exploded, and now the curtains were alight. "What's happening? What's the matter?" Mr. Carter had come running down the corridor, coughing. Now he opened the door, and the draft sent the flames up to the ceiling height. "Push them out at the front. I'll go back for Maya." He turned around and stumbled back down the smoke-filled corridor. But he did not go to Maya's room. He did not even try to. Instead, he groped his way into his study and began to tear open his cabinets. "My collection," he muttered, "my collection." And his hand fastened on the velvet box of eyes just as he slid to the ground, overcome by the smoke and flames now rolling and licking through the bungalow. And that's where we're going to stop today. We'll pick up on that very exciting cliffhanger tomorrow with Chapter 19. We've been reading Journey to the River Sea by Eva Ibbotson, illustrated by Kevin Hawkes, and published by Puffin Books. Once again, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.